Welcome to Mind Your Music Business. Today, I am very super excited to have a veteran executive of the music game, Mr. Mark Money Green. Mark Money Green is a living testament to resilience, vision, and an unshakable passion for music. He worked closely with icons such as Melba Moore, Freddie Jackson, Grandmaster Flash, Drew Hill, and even Prince. As an independent entrepreneur, he secured a record deal with Lightyear Warner Brothers with Tina Marie as his first artist and later became general manager of North Star Distribution, working with Prince's NPG Records. Today, as the founder and owner of Celebrity Talent Agency, Mark continues to shape the industry, securing talents for major tours, festivals, and commercials. He also serves as Associate Director, General Manager of Lehman Performing Arts Center, and Chairman of Artist Relations for the Hip Hop Museum. Through every challenge, Mark's mantra has remained the same: the show must go on. Welcome to the stage, the one and only Mr. Mark Money Green. Hey, Mark,
Thank you so much, Trey. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
how are you?
I'm blessed. I'm
I,
definitely blessed.
I just want to ask you, I love to read the bio, but if there something about you that you would like people to know further than what they've written in your bio?
I think at the end of the day, I start off my book talking about God and I end it by God. So I just want people to know that my faith is through my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Ooh, I love you for that. Mine too. So that just sets us right on the right path. So just tell me a little bit about your background. Tell me about your home life with your mother and your father growing up.
Wow. Okay. The funny thing is, I've always had a passion for music since I can remember. I think it was around eighth grade when I really decided this is the journey, this is the way I wanted to go in terms of my life and my career. However, my parents really didn't see that. They didn't like the idea about music. As everybody else, they want you to be a lawyer, a doctor. And my father wanted me to go into the service, and I didn't want to do any of that. I just stuck to what I wanted to do, my dreams, my passion, and that's kind of where I am now.
First, got to say, your book was an experience and a journey that took me on such a nice high from just listen. I didn't made a whole playlist from the people that you work with, songs I have not listened to in years. Ray Goodman and Brown, Gotta Be a Special Lady.
Hmm.
Gotta be a special lady. Okay, let me come back. But let's talk a little bit about that journey. And in your book, one, you talked about the fact that you had a challenge as a child at 11 years old and you weren't able to walk. Talk about how that prepared you for the future and what you're doing now.
Well, I think it was one day I just woke up and I was sick. I think I just got over the pneumonia, and I went to turn the TV, change the channel because we didn't have controls back there. You had to get up and change the channel, and I fell on the floor and I had that numb feeling in my leg, and it wouldn't go away. And eventually, my father came home and took me to the hospital, and I ended up being in the hospital for like three or 4 months. And they said to me, after I had seven specialists, and they said, we don't know what happened. You're paralyzed from your waist down. You never walk again. But my mother, who was a woman of faith, who taught me about God from the time I can remember, came to me and she just told me to keep praying and ask God for healing. As a young kid, I didn't know what that meant. I mean, yes, I do what she told me, but to me, it really didn't really set in until one day I decided to just follow what she said and just kept praying and asking God for healing. And eventually, what happened from there, I got feelings in my leg and I began to walk again.
Wow. Do you believe that at that young age, God was preparing you for the journey because you had a crazy journey? And if you were not resilient, you would not have made it through half of the things that you talk. I got to keep talking about the book. Half of the things that you talk about in that book. Do you think that that prepared your strength to be prepared for obstacles and things unseen?
Absolutely. I mean, when you go through something dramatic like that and you pray to God and God answers your prayers, you can't do nothing but, go forward. Anytime that I really felt that things weren't going my way, I asked God for guidance. And as you will read in my book, I start off with God, and at the end, after you see all the things I went through and dealing with guns, drugs, and everything else that I talk about in the book, it wasn't until I turned my life back over to God and dedicated my life back to Him that things really turned around for me in a positive way and just really just expanded my whole life and career.
So one of your mentors was Freddie Perrin. Am I saying his name correct?
Freddie Perrin, yes.
Yes. Tell me about that experience. I know you went to your friend's house and it just tell me about just that
But
experience and then connecting with him.
oh yeah, so by the time I was in eighth grade, I already knew what I wanted to do. I went to the library. I pulled up the books. I saw all the different jobs, and I was playing drums, and I met Freddie. He was playing guitar, so we talked about forming a band. He said, "Yeah, we should do it," and he invited me to his house. And when I got to his house, I saw all these gold and platinum records on his wall, and I said, "Wow, what is this?" And I looked closely, and I saw the Jackson 5, I Want You Back, ABC, Stop the Love You Say. And I said, where did you get all of that from? He's like, yo, my uncle wrote all those songs. I said, what? And from that point on, he became my best friend. I mean, I saw that and I said, that's what I want. I want those albums. So eventually what happened was we got in touch with Freddie's uncle. We started our little band. We had it for about 3 or 4 years. We performed at high schools and we doing cocktail sips and everything around the neighborhood because thought we were going to be the next Jackson 5. We went into recording studio. We made recordings. Eventually we realized that we didn't have the talent to be the next Jackson 5. And by that time the band disbanded. Talk about in my book in the early 70s, when disco came around, all the funk bands started to disband, and the disco era became the next big thing, and DJing was the next big thing. And I already started DJing, and I went to Freddie. I said, Freddie, I want to be this DJ. And I rattled off some rhymes I heard Hank Spann say, and he's like, no, Mark, no. He said, let me tell you, you don't want to play the music, you want to make the music. He said, go to Howard, study music, learn how to play all the instruments, and you make the hits and make the people play your music.
That's so, so good. I love that. So I just want you to talk to some of the young people out here who everybody wants to be in front of the camera. Everybody wants to be in the bright lights.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to just talk about the success from behind the scenes and being that engine.
Right. Well, for me, I was one of those kids. I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be an artist. I went from wanting to be a singer to being a rapper. And and for me, I realized I had limited talent. I have to be honest with you. When I got out of college, I had a band in college. We were playing all the banquets and everything. And I thought I was this great drummer until one day I came to New York City and I met all these people that were much better than me. I realized when I was in college that I wasn't a good singer. I tried singing, but when you're young, you think you can sing, but until you meet some real singers, I met some real singers. I was like, so I had to really look at myself and be realistic that, I didn't have the talent to be that artist, but I saw and I still had the passion to do something in the business. During that time, I realized that behind the scenes was just as good as being in front of the scenes because you could make just as much money, if not more, behind the scenes. You have just as much publicity and press and accolades from behind the scenes as you would front. And when I found that out, I decided, you know what, I'm going to focus on making my career and life behind the scenes.
Mm. You work with some amazing people. You work with Melba Moore, Freddie Jackson. How is it that you kept your head on straight? Because not only are they experiencing the fame, but you're experiencing the access, the fame, the drugs, and all of these things. How did you keep grounded in an industry that is surrounded by so many good things, but so many tempting bad things?
Well, for me, I was always a planner. So I always tell people, and especially young people, I says, you have to plan out your goals. You always hear people say, oh, make your goals. What are you going to do in 5 years, 10 years? And I really took, heed to what people were saying. And I mapped out my strategy, my goals. Now, in the book, as I say, the show must go on. Every now and then you're going to cross, you're going to run across a roadblock or you're going to run across something that's going to stop you from getting to that point at that moment. But if you continue to focus on your goals and your passions, that will continue to move you forward. So for me, that was it. I just stuck straight into what I wanted to do. I kept my head straight. I didn't let the obstacles, deter me from doing what I wanted to do.
Rapper's delight. Like you are a big major part of history. And I know sometimes like I don't blow my head up, but that was like one of the first rap songs that I ever heard. What was it like to be a part of such an explosive movement?
For me, and I'm just starting to feel it now. And to be honest with you, I discovered rap in 1977, and I brought it to my hometown in Jersey. And a guy that I went to school with, actually, his name was Guy O'Brien. We went to high school. We were friends in high school. He was a freshman, and I was a junior. And when I discovered this rapping over in the Bronx and I brought it to New Jersey, he was amazed because everybody was like, "What is that you're doing? Sing that song. Let me hear that poem." Because they didn't know what to call it back then. And Guy would follow me around. He kept asking me about what is it like. He wanted to know about what I was doing. And eventually, he formed his own little DJ set. And by the time I went to college in '78, he had already started rapping. And by '79, he called me up and said, "Mark, we're making a record." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "We're making a record off of Good Times." I said, "What do you mean you're making a record?" And when he told me that, I had to be honest with you, I was jealous and envy of him because that should have been me. That's what I was thinking. But I give him thanks now because for a long time I would tell people my story. Nobody believed me. I had no proof. Everybody was a rapper by the time I got to college. Everybody was DJing and rapping. Nobody cared. Nobody even believed anything. So I stopped talking about it. None of my friends ever knew until this book came out because eventually Guy had an interview that I saw online where the guy by the name of Jake Kwan interviewed him, and he said, "Well, how did you first hear rap?" And he's like, "Was it mixtapes?" He says, "No, it was an upperclassman." And then eventually, Jay just kept pushing him. "Well, who was the upperclassman? What is his name?" And he said my name. When I saw that interview, I just went crazy because I was like, "There it is! It's the proof. There's the proof." And eventually, I caught up with Guy. We talked about it, and he started mentioning my name in all the interviews. And he started saying, "Listen, Mark Green is actually the first person I ever heard rapping." And not only that, but he did the forward in my book, and he talked about, and he gave me the credit, and I'm honored because again, this was something I knew I did, and I was on TV and everything, but I had no proof, so I wouldn't have been ghetto famous if it wasn't for him.
I love it. I love when people give the accolades when
Yes.
it matters. I love that. And talk about signing Will Smith, Salt and Pepper. Like those are big things in your career. Talk about what made you think that they were the artists that they were, and how did you have that eye? And you also talked about a couple of opportunities that you missed out on,
Yeah.
and Beyonce was one of them. But talk a little bit about that.
Well, the crazy thing was a lot of people don't understand like the early days of hip hop, it was just something we did for fun. It was like playing the dozens. Nobody thought about making money. It was nothing, no thing about a career. It was just like a game that we played. And eventually we went out on the road. And I think it was the Fresh Fest in 1985 where I met everybody. And I was a road manager and we all knew each other, Vincent Davis, Tyrone Williams, and I, worked with all these artists. So by the time I came off the road, I decided that, I wanted to be an agent, and I focused on being an agent. So when I got the job as an agent, I was booking all R&B, jazz, and blues, and I said I'm going to book rap. Now my boss had no idea what the rap stuff was, but I knew everybody, so I started signing people. And one of the people that helped me out a lot was Herbie Lovebug. Herbie was the biggest promoter producer of his time. He was like the Puffy or the Timberland of our era. But he had Salt and Pepper, Kid and Play, Kwame, a whole bunch of people back in the day, and we became friends. And he gave me Salt and Pepper, he gave me Kid and Play, and I knew these guys because we were all on the road together. So it was an easy transition. They were familiar with me. They knew I knew hip hop. Because again, back in the early 80s, if you look back, a lot of record companies didn't even know how to market or what to do with this music. They had no idea what this was about. I was already in it. So I knew the people. I was part of this culture. So it's easy for people to come to me. When I finally got my groove on, I started going out for more artists, and I met some guy in Philadelphia, and he kept telling me about some group that was from Philly named, Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. So I got in touch with the manager, went down to Philly, met with them, and he was fine with me signing them. So I signed them, and I gave them their first show. Actually, I gave them their, but Will his first show after high school. I think he graduated in June, and his first real show was the Latin Quarters in 1986. And I don't know what it was about him that made me decide to keep the contract, his business card, and the official letter I sent giving him his first show. But I have it, and it's been a crazy road for me.
Oh my goodness. You still have the original?
Yes, actually, it's in, and I put a copy of it in the book. When you buy the book, you can actually see the letter and everything.
Oh my goodness. What that needs to be in the is it in the museum?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I have to go visit and see that because that's amazing because it's so amazing because you never know what somebody is going to be. And then when you tap into their talent and give them opportunities and it comes full circle, it's just an amazing feeling. And you sit so humble. And I know that you probably don't think a lot of these things are a big deal, but as I was reading the book
Right.
and I was just going through the Force MDs, tears. I was
You're
just like, I really was having like moments with you. So this book is more than storytelling. Like it really was an experience for me, and I really enjoyed it. And again, like I really have this crazy playlist right now of songs I hadn't thought about in years.
right.
And just what was one of your hardest struggles going through your journey on the road, transitioning from these different positions at labels, and then losing jobs and staying, keeping the momentum up?
I have to say it had to be drugs because you have to realize in the 80s, the drugs, the drug era was up and going. I mean, crack started coming around 86, but prior to that, you know, cocaine was just it. And one of the challenges for me was trying to keep my head focused and not get caught up in it, but also as a leader and as a person on the road, having to deal with those that had the substance abuse problems. We would go to cities and sometimes the artist wasn't there, or they in the hood trying to find ways to find it. Um, you know, I talk about in my book how at night, at some points during the tour, I had to change rooms because people would come to my room 3, 4 in the morning, 5. They didn't care. When you high and you hooked on drugs, you don't give a damn about who, what, where. You need that money. I had the suitcase of money. And after a couple of times of getting up in the middle of the night, pulling out the briefcase, having them sign for the money. I said, I can't do this no more because I'm not getting the sleep. I'm not getting the rest. So I had to really keep my head focused. And I talk about it in the book, the stories of everything from a guy making $2,500 a week to the point that he didn't have a home to go to because it was all blown in his nose, at the end of the day.
And you talked about in the book too how you had to bring a supplier to that was listen. I know I'm not saying I'm not promoting drugs or anything or drug sales, but that was genius
Yes.
to
And
say,
I had to because, the crazy thing was I started realizing when we pull up into the city, and it was mostly not so much the band members, but a lot of the tech people and a few, musicians here and there. They would go into the hood trying to get their fix. And sometimes they would miss rehearsals. Sometimes they even be late to the show. And sometimes they wouldn't even be functional. So I came up with the idea. I says, you know what? How about if I just bring the drugs on the bus and I control when and how they could have it? And it worked out so well for me because I didn't have to worry about them missing the show. I gave them times, and I won't even go into all that. I want people to read the book, but
yes, you got to listen. Let me say this to the people: you got to read the book. That part right there. And again, we're by no way promoting drugs or
oh
having
no,
people, but that was just a moment where you had to make an executive decision to say, how can I handle such a big problem?
right.
Because it's about to affect my money, and we can't be having our money affected.
The crazy thing, Trey, is when I look back after reading this book, I realized I was only 23, 24, 25. And I look at myself, I said, damn, I was really dealing with some real situations there. And I wonder when I talk to my son and other people at the age of 25, there's no way they could handle something like this.
Mm-mm.
You have to have not only the street knowledge, but intelligence enough to know how and when and what to do.
Yeah, and I know I have my own children who would never survive the things that we survived growing up because if we even drop them in Newark right now, they'd be in trouble.
Hmm.
So you negotiated a movie deal with Netflix.
Yes.
Just the things that you've done, your transitions,
Hmm.
how did you strategically go from music to movies?
Well, once I became an agent, I was dealing with, at first I was working with Hammer a lot, so people were calling me for Hammer, and I made a lot of connections in the TV world. Again, I negotiated the Get Down for Grandmaster Flash. This guy Buzz Lorman had called me, and I thought he was just one of these guys trying to, get over. And eventually, I looked him up, and I realized he was a real Hollywood producer. And when he talked about doing this movie, the movie was not almost, it wasn't about Flash, it was about the era of hip hop. And again, I negotiated the deal, and I won't go into all of it, but
Don't.
it was a learning experience.
Mm. Let me ask you about the importance of relationships
Hmm.
because I see how you strategically maneuver through the trenches by making key relationships with key people. And you talk about Louise, the lawyer,
Yes.
and I know of her from Bob Celestin,
Uh-huh.
who I interviewed, and he spoke so highly of her too. So how important is making sure you are fostering important relationships as you go along this journey in the music business?
Well, I talk about in my book, I said you better make sure you have a gangster pen game. You got to make sure you know what you're doing and get you a lawyer that knows that can direct and show you the way. And Louise was that person. She was that person that everybody talked about, and I give her all the credit because she coached, mentored, and showed me the ropes of this business.
And I love as you go through the book, you have these rules
Yes.
that came along in your life.
Hmm.
We won't tell all the rules, but rule number 10 was trust your gut.
Right.
Why is that important?
Because sometimes I say that, and it happened with Tina Marie. You have to you trust your gut and not your feelings. My gut told me to do one thing, but my feelings was like, oh no, da 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 da. So at the end of the day, trusting my feelings was a bad mistake on my part, and I should have just stuck with my gut.
How do you know the difference between your gut and your feelings?
Oh, because your gut tells you, you got to do this, and your feelings is like, well, you don't have to do that this way. You can do it this way, and that's not going to happen.
How is it just running your own agency? And what made you make that decision? It's so, and I'm a business owner too. It's very easy working for somebody else, getting your check, not dealing with the taxes, not dealing with the ins and outs, not dealing with the highs and the lows. What made you step out there and say, I'm going to do this?
Well, it came out of default because I really didn't have a job anymore, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And somebody approached me to see if I could book a couple artists, and I took that money. I said yes, and that's when I said, well, I have no job. I might as well invest, get me a phone, desk, and I didn't know how to work a computer, so I brought one of my friends on, and he helped me and showed me the ropes, and that was it. The company started, and here you go. The show must go on.
And you actually have to pick talent for your company. Like you have to pick your talent agents and the people who come in and run things. How do you, as a boss, vet your people?
Well, it's hard because you have to really, and I talk about this. There's a situation where I hired all my friends to work for me, thinking they would cover my back, and actually they were stabbing me in my back. And I learned a good lesson from that is that keep family and friends separate from your business, you know, um, and uh, and that's kind of what I kind of stood by.
With the climate changing in music,
Hmm.
what is your strategy compared to back in the day when you were dealing with people as an agent? What is the difference now?
Well, back in the day, it was a lot different. It was better. You had more creativity. You had more hands-on with the artists. Where today everything is internet-based. There's no real creativity. There's no real formal teaching, so to speak, you know. And I think I like the part of back in the day because it was there. You dealt with the person. You felt everything they wanted to do.
Let's go into your role at the Hip Hop Museum. What does that entail, and how important is for you to preserve the hip hop legacy?
Well, I really want to talk about that, but we're gonna have to come back because you know I got one more thing I got to do here, and I would like to really come back and talk about that. So if we can,
Yes,
we'll come back. Is that okay with you?
that's fine with me. Please let everybody know where they can find you and how they can purchase the book.
You can find me on Celebrity Talent Agency on Facebook or Celebrity Talent Inc. on Instagram, or you can purchase the book through Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, or you can go to my website, markmoneygreen.com.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your talent, and I will have you back again. This is Mark Green, Mark Money Green, one of the biggest icons in the music industry. We thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Please go out and get his book. You will definitely appreciate the experience. It is more than a book, it is a journey, it is an experience, and you'll love it. So, we thank you for tuning into Mind Your Music Business. I'm your host, Trey Kearney, and we'll see you for the next episode. Peace and blessings.
Thank you so much.